Chapter 1, A Strange Message. 3 years had passed since the events on the island. Rob, Valleyman Beans, and their friends had returned to their normal lives, but they could never forget the horrors they had experienced. They all stayed in touch, but their conversations gradually shifted away from the island and towards more mundane topics. One day, Rob received a strange message on his phone. It was an invitation to a virtual reality game called Chronos 2. Rob was skeptical at first, but the message claimed that the game was developed by the same company that created the original Chronos game. He couldn't resist the temptation to check it out. Rob immediately contacted his old friends and shared the message with them. They were all intrigued and decided to give the game a try together. As they entered the virtual world of Chronos 2, they noticed something off about the game. The graphics were too realistic, the sounds too lifelike. They could feel the heat of the sun and the cold of the wind. It was as if they were actually there. But then, strange things began to happen. They encountered creatures that were not supposed to be in the game, and the game's objectives seemed to be changing without warning. The players started to feel like they were being watched, and a sense of dread began to fill them. As they progressed through the game, they discovered clues that suggested something sinister was at work behind the scenes. They had a feeling that Chronos 2 was not just a game, but something much more dangerous. Rob and his friends knew they had to get to the bottom of this mystery, even if it meant risking their own lives. They were determined to uncover the truth behind Chronos 2 and put an end to whatever evil force was behind it. Chapter 2, The Missing Research Team. Rob and the group set out to explore the island, but they soon came across a strange sight. They stumbled upon an abandoned research camp, where the tents were torn apart and the equipment was scattered. It appeared as though the researchers had fled in a hurry. As they began to investigate, they found something that sent shivers down their spines. They discovered a notebook lying on the ground, filled with cryptic notes and sketches of bizarre creatures. The notes spoke of a powerful and malevolent entity that lurked in the depths of the island, waiting for its next victims. The group realized that the research team had been investigating this entity, but had clearly met with a gruesome fate. As they continued to search the area, they found more evidence of a struggle, including bloodstains on the rocks and signs of a violent confrontation. Despite their fear, the group knew that they needed to uncover the truth about this entity before it was too late. They decided to gather as much information as they could and set out to find the missing research team. Little did they know that their journey would lead them into the heart of darkness, where they would face unspeakable horrors and a terror beyond their wildest nightmares. Chapter 3, The Haunted House. It had been 2 weeks since Rob and his friends arrived on the island. They had spent most of their time exploring and scavenging for food and supplies. However, something felt off about the island. It was as if the island was alive, and it was watching them. One day, as they were walking along the beach, they saw an abandoned house in the distance. It looked old and run down, but something about it drew them in. They decided to investigate. As they approached the house, they felt a chill run down their spines. The air around them grew colder, and the sky darkened. They hesitated for a moment but decided to push forward. The door creaked as they pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, and cobwebs covered the walls. They could hear the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and they were plunged into darkness. They tried to turn on their flashlights, but they wouldn't work. They were trapped. As they stumbled through the darkness, they heard strange whispers and eerie laughter. They felt something brush past them, and they could hear the sound of someone breathing behind them. They tried to find their way out but couldn't seem to locate the door. The house seemed to be changing, the walls moving and the doors disappearing. It was like a living, breathing entity, and it was determined to keep them trapped. Finally, after what felt like hours, they found a window and smashed it open. They crawled out, gasping for fresh air. As they looked back at the house, they could see it was no longer abandoned. It was alive and pulsating with malevolent energy. They ran back to their campsite, shaken and terrified. They knew they had to warn the others about the haunted house. But little did they know, the island had more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 4. As the group followed the winding path through the forest, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves and every snap of a twig made them jump. Rob tried to keep his nerves in check, but his palms were sweating and his heart was racing. Suddenly, they heard a low growl from behind them. They turned around to see a pack of wild dogs, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The dogs began to circle around the group, baring their teeth and snarling. Rob and the others pulled out their weapons and stood back to back, ready to defend themselves. They knew that these dogs were not to be underestimated. But as the dogs closed in, they suddenly stopped in their tracks and retreated back into the darkness. The group was confused, but they didn't have time to dwell on it. They continued on their path, which led them to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a lone tree, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches twisted and reaching out like skeletal fingers. Rob couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as he looked at the tree. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. He felt drawn to it, but also repelled by it. As they approached the tree, they saw that there was something carved into the trunk. It was a symbol that Rob recognized from his studies of ancient civilizations. It was the symbol of Chronos. Rob knew that they were getting closer to the answers they had been seeking. But he also knew that they were getting closer to danger. He could feel it in his bones. The group made camp near the tree, keeping watch throughout the night. Rob couldn't sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of what they might find. He knew that they were on the brink of uncovering something that could change everything. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, the group set off again, following the path that led deeper into the heart of the island. They knew that they were getting closer to the truth, but they also knew that they were getting closer to something much darker. Chapter 5. As the group continued to make their way through the forest, they could feel a sense of unease settling over them. It was as if they were being watched, and each step felt heavier than the last. Valley Man Beans, who was leading the group, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He held up a hand, motioning for the others to be quiet. They all froze, listening intently. In the distance, they could hear a strange, guttural sound. It was unlike anything they had ever heard before. Erebus, who was standing at the back of the group, drew his sword. He didn't know what was out there, but he was ready for anything. The others followed suit, gripping their weapons tightly. As they moved closer to the source of the sound, they saw movement in the trees. It was dark, and difficult to make out, but it was definitely there. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was humanoid, but covered in thick fur, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The group tensed, ready to attack, but the creature held up its hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm," it said, in a voice that was surprisingly gentle. "I have been watching you, and I believe we have a common enemy." The group exchanged wary glances, but they lowered their weapons. The creature stepped forward, revealing itself to be a Sasquatch. "I have seen the horrors that lurk on this island," the Sasquatch continued. "And I have reason to believe that they are connected to the events that occurred here 3 years ago." The group listened in silence as the Sasquatch recounted his experiences. He had been living on the island for years, and had seen things that no mortal should ever see. He spoke of dark magic, twisted experiments, and a powerful entity that controlled everything on the island. The group was skeptical at first, but the Sasquatch's words struck a chord with them. They had seen strange things too, and they knew that there was something deeply wrong with the island. "Will you help me?" the Sasquatch asked, looking at them with pleading eyes. "Together, we can uncover the truth and put an end to the horror that has plagued this island for far too long." The group exchanged a determined look. They didn't know what they were getting into, but they knew they couldn't turn their backs on this. They nodded in agreement, and with that, they set out deeper into the forest, following the Sasquatch's lead. Chapter 6. The group followed the Sasquatch through the dense forest, their steps careful as they navigated through the thick undergrowth. The creature moved quickly, and they struggled to keep up, but they knew they had to press on. As they walked, they couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the sounds of the forest became muffled and distant. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end, and they knew they were in for a rough ride. Suddenly, they heard a loud roar from somewhere up ahead. The Sasquatch turned to face them, its eyes filled with fear. It gestured for them to follow, and they sprinted after it, their hearts pounding in their chests. They soon reached a clearing, and what they saw made them freeze in their tracks. A massive creature stood before them, its body covered in matted fur and its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It let out another roar, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The group exchanged a glance, their determination unwavering. They knew they had to face this creature head-on if they wanted to survive. With weapons drawn, they charged towards the beast, ready to fight for their lives. Chapter 7. Adrenaline was still pumping through their veins as the group charged towards the massive creature. Their weapons were drawn, and they were ready to fight for their lives. The creature let out another roar, and the ground shook beneath their feet. They circled around the creature, trying to get a better view of its weak points. But the beast was quick and powerful, and it swatted at them with its massive paws. The group dodged and weaved, trying to avoid its attacks. Suddenly, one of them spotted a glint of light coming from the creature's chest. They yelled out to the others, and they quickly changed their tactics. They focused their attacks on the creature's chest, hoping to hit whatever was causing the light. As they fought, the creature let out a deafening scream, and its fur began to smoke. The light grew brighter and brighter until it exploded, sending the group flying in all directions. When they finally got to their feet, they saw that the creature was lying motionless on the ground. They had defeated it, but at what cost? They were all battered and bruised, and they knew they had to get out of the forest before anything else could happen. Chapter 8. As the group made their way out of the forest, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They had defeated the creature, but at what cost? Their bodies were bruised and battered, and they knew they would need medical attention soon. As they walked, they heard strange noises coming from the trees around them. It sounded like something was following them. They turned around, but they saw nothing. The forest was eerily silent, except for the sound of their footsteps. Suddenly, they heard a twig snap behind them. They spun around, their weapons at the ready. But there was nothing there. They exchanged a worried glance, and they quickened their pace. The noises continued to follow them, growing louder and more frequent. They could feel their hearts pounding in their chests as they walked. They didn't know what was out there, but they knew it was dangerous. As they reached the edge of the forest, they heard a final roar from deep within the trees. They knew that their adventure was far from over, and they braced themselves for what lay ahead. Chapter 9. The group stumbled out of the forest, their bodies aching from the battle with the strange creature. They collapsed on the ground, panting heavily, and looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape. As they caught their breath, they heard a strange noise coming from the nearby mountains. It sounded like a low rumble, growing louder and louder with each passing moment. Suddenly, a massive dragon appeared from behind the peaks, its scales gleaming in the fading light. The group's eyes widened in shock and terror as the dragon swooped down towards them, its jaws opening wide. They scrambled to their feet, grabbing their weapons and trying to prepare for the impending attack. The dragon landed with a thunderous roar, its wings sending gusts of wind that knocked the group off balance. They struggled to keep their footing as the dragon approached them, its fiery breath scorching the ground. The group knew they had to act fast. They split up, each member taking a different side of the dragon and launching a coordinated attack. Swords clashed against scales as they fought with all their might, their adrenaline pumping through their veins. As they battled the dragon, they noticed that something was different about it. Its movements were jerky and uncoordinated, as if it was under some sort of control. The group began to suspect that something or someone was controlling the dragon. Just as they were about to strike the final blow, the dragon let out a deafening roar and collapsed to the ground, motionless. The group was stunned as they approached the dragon's body, not sure what to make of what had just happened. Suddenly, they heard a voice from behind them. "Well done, my loyal minions. You have done well in defeating my dragon." They turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, a wicked smile on their face. It was clear that the battle was far from over. Chapters 10. The group stumbled through the forest, still reeling from their encounter with the dragon. They had narrowly escaped with their lives, but they knew they couldn't rest yet. They needed to find a way off the island and back to civilization. As they walked, they heard a familiar sound in the distance. It was the Sasquatch, the creature that had led them to the dragon in the first place. The group exchanged a glance, unsure of what to expect. But when the Sasquatch came into view, they saw that it was injured. Its fur was singed and its eyes were filled with pain. It collapsed in front of them, unable to go any further. The group rushed to its side, offering it water and medical supplies. As they tended to its wounds, the Sasquatch spoke to them in broken English. "Dragon, dangerous, must leave, follow me." The group didn't need any further convincing. They knew they had to follow the Sasquatch if they wanted to survive. They hoisted it onto their shoulders and set off through the forest once again, this time with a new sense of purpose. As they walked, the Sasquatch led them to a hidden cave. Inside, they found a map and some supplies that would help them survive on the island. But the most important thing they found was a radio, one that could potentially get them off the island and back to civilization. The group exchanged a determined look. They knew they had a long road ahead of them, but they were ready to face whatever came their way. They had each other, and they had the will to survive. With the Sasquatch leading the way, they set off towards their next destination, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Chapter 11, The Abandoned Mine. The group emerged from the forest, battered and bruised but alive. They had defeated the dragon and saved the Sasquatch, but they were still far from home. As they wandered through the wilderness, they came across an abandoned mine. Curiosity piqued, they decided to investigate. The entrance was covered in cobwebs and looked like it hadn't been used in years, but they could hear faint sounds coming from inside. They cautiously made their way through the mine, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Suddenly, they heard a voice calling out to them. It was faint and distant, but they could make out a name, Ethan. They exchanged a puzzled look and followed the sound deeper into the mine. The tunnel led them to a large chamber, where they found a man lying on the ground. He was injured and weak, but he managed to tell them his story. Ethan had been exploring the mine when he stumbled upon a group of bandits. They attacked him and left him for dead, taking everything he had. The group exchanged a determined look. They couldn't let the bandits get away with this. They asked Ethan if he could guide them to the bandits' hideout, and he agreed. They quickly set out, following Ethan's lead through the winding tunnels. After what felt like hours, they finally emerged into a large cavern. The bandits were gathered around a fire, laughing and drinking. The group crept up behind them, ready to strike. But before they could make a move, one of the bandits spotted them. The group was outnumbered and outmatched, but they didn't back down. They charged towards the bandits, their weapons drawn and their determination unwavering. A fierce battle broke out, but in the end, the group emerged victorious. They had defeated the bandits and avenged Ethan's injuries. As they emerged from the mine, they felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. They were one step closer to home. Chapters 12. Title: The Betrayal. As the group continued their journey through the forest, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up, and they gripped their weapons tightly. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes. They readied themselves for a fight, but to their surprise, a figure stumbled out of the foliage. It was a young woman, with torn clothing and a haunted look in her eyes. She introduced herself as Emily and told them that she had been lost in the forest for days. The group took her in and promised to help her find her way back to civilization. As they walked, Emily shared her story with them. She had been on a hiking trip with her friends when they stumbled upon a hidden cave. Inside the cave, they found a strange artifact that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Without thinking, Emily's friends touched the artifact, and suddenly, they were transported to another dimension. Emily was the only one who managed to escape, and she had been wandering the forest ever since, trying to find a way back home. The group was skeptical of Emily's story but decided to help her nonetheless. However, as they neared the location of the hidden cave, they noticed that Emily's demeanor had changed. She was no longer the scared and helpless woman they had found in the forest. Instead, she seemed confident and in control. Suddenly, Emily turned on them, drawing a weapon from beneath her clothing. She revealed that she had made a deal with a powerful being from the other dimension, promising to lure unsuspecting victims to the cave in exchange for her friend's safe return. The group was shocked and betrayed. They tried to reason with Emily, but it was no use. She was determined to see the deal through and would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. The group was forced to fight Emily, and it was a brutal and intense battle. In the end, they emerged victorious, but they were shaken to their core. They realized that they couldn't trust anyone in this strange and dangerous world, and they needed to be more careful in their future dealings. Chapter 13, Night of the Hunt. As the sun set, the group huddled around a campfire, their eyes scanning the surrounding darkness for any signs of danger. Rob kept watch, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Valley Man Beans and Arabas sat close by, whispering to each other in hushed tones. Longo_man and Gaming Ramon had taken up positions on either side of the camp, their bows at the ready. Gank and Hapir were sharpening their knives, their faces set in grim determination. CC Defender and WTF-27PL were rummaging through their packs, searching for any useful items. Charlie, Emily and Sakurin were sitting together, their heads bowed in quiet contemplation. Funny Jamie was pacing back and forth, his eyes darting nervously around the camp. Suddenly, they heard a rustling in the bushes. Rob tensed, his grip on his sword tightening. Valley Man Beans and Arabas stood up, their hands on their weapons. A figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It was a massive wolf, its fur as black as the night sky. It snarled, revealing razor-sharp teeth, and leapt towards the group. Longo_man and Gaming Ramon fired their arrows, but the wolf dodged them with ease. Gank and Hapir charged forward, their knives glinting in the firelight. The wolf swiped at them with its claws, but they managed to dodge its attacks. CC Defender and WTF-27PL threw a net over the wolf, but it broke free with a fierce growl. Charlie, Emily and Sakurin unleashed a barrage of spells, but the wolf shook them off like they were nothing. Funny Jamie ran forward, his arms outstretched. The wolf leapt towards him, but he dodged at the last second, grabbing onto its fur. He clung on tight, pulling with all his might. The wolf snarled and snapped, trying to shake him loose. But Funny Jamie held on, his muscles straining with effort. Slowly but surely, he managed to pull the wolf to the ground. With a final howl, the wolf went limp. Funny Jamie lay panting on top of it, his eyes closed in exhaustion. The group gathered around him, cheering and patting him on the back. They had won the night's battle, but they knew that there would be more challenges to come. As they settled back around the fire, they knew that they would need to stay vigilant if they wanted to make it out of this place alive. Chapter 14. Title: Into the Abyss. As the group continued their journey, they found themselves at the edge of a dark and foreboding abyss. The wind howled around them, and the air was thick with the stench of sulfur. Rob peered over the edge, but all he could see was darkness. He turned to the others. "We have to cross this," he said. "There's no other way." Arabas stepped forward. "I'll go first," he said, his voice steady. He took a deep breath and leaped over the edge, disappearing into the darkness below. The group waited in silence for what felt like an eternity, but was only a few minutes. Suddenly, they heard a faint shout from below. "It's safe. Come on down." One by one, they leaped over the edge and into the abyss. The wind whipped around them, and their stomachs churned as they fell. But then, they hit solid ground, and they looked around in awe. They were in a vast cavern, lit by the glow of luminescent mushrooms. The walls were jagged and rough, and the floor was slick with moisture. In the distance, they could hear the sound of rushing water. Valley Man Bean stepped forward, his eyes wide with wonder. "This place is incredible," he said. "I've never seen anything like it." But their wonder was short-lived. As they continued through the cavern, they began to feel a sense of unease. It was as if they were being watched. Suddenly, they heard a low growling sound. They spun around, weapons at the ready, and saw a pack of snarling creatures advancing towards them. The group sprang into action, battling the creatures with all their might. But they were outnumbered, and the creatures were relentless. It seemed as though they would never make it out of the cavern alive. But then, just when all seemed lost, Longo_man let out a mighty roar, and a beam of light shot from his hands. The creatures scattered, howling in terror, and the group knew that they had found their way out. As they emerged from the cavern, blinking in the bright sunlight, they knew that they had overcome yet another obstacle. They shared a look of determination, knowing that they had to keep moving forward. Chapter 15. Title: The Secret Room. The group of adventurers had been traveling for weeks, and they were exhausted. They had faced countless dangers and overcome numerous obstacles, but they were still far from their goal. As they trudged through the dense forest, They spotted a small cabin in the distance. As they approached, they saw that the cabin was old and decrepit, with paint peeling from its walls and vines climbing up its sides. But it was a welcome sight nonetheless, and they eagerly made their way inside. Once inside, they realized that the cabin was more than it seemed. There was a hidden room tucked away in the back, accessible only through a hidden doorway. The group exchanged a look of excitement and curiosity, and they set out to explore the room. Inside, they found a treasure trove of ancient artifacts and mysterious objects. There were old tomes and scrolls, intricate maps, and even a strange device that none of them could identify. As they examined the objects, they realized that this was no ordinary room. Suddenly, they heard a creaking sound, and the group froze. They realized that the hidden door had closed behind them, trapping them in the room. Panic set in as they tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. As they searched for another way out, they heard a voice echoing through the room. It was a voice they didn't recognize, but it spoke to them with an air of authority. "Greetings, adventurers," the voice said. "I am the guardian of this room, and I have been waiting for someone worthy to enter. You have proven yourselves to be brave and resourceful, and I have a task for you." The group listened intently as the voice explained their mission. They were to retrieve a powerful artifact from a dangerous dungeon deep in the heart of the forest. The artifact was said to have the power to control the elements, and the group knew that it would be a valuable asset in their journey. With renewed determination, the group set out on their new mission. They knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, but they were ready to face whatever came their way. They had a new purpose and a newfound sense of purpose, and they were ready to conquer whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 16. As the group ventured deeper into the forest, their anticipation grew with each step. They had a clear mission now, and they were eager to accomplish it. The voice had told them that the artifact they sought was located in a dungeon somewhere ahead, and they knew that they had to be careful. They moved stealthily, trying to avoid any traps or creatures that might be lurking in the shadows. The air was thick with tension, and they all had their weapons drawn, ready for whatever might come their way. They soon reached the entrance to the dungeon, and the group exchanged a determined look. They knew that they couldn't turn back now. They descended into the dungeon, their eyes adjusting to the dimly lit surroundings. The dungeon was full of twists and turns, and it seemed like it went on forever. They encountered many challenges along the way, including puzzles, traps, and fierce creatures guarding the artifact. But they pressed on, determined to complete their mission. Finally, they came to a large room, and there it was, the artifact they had been searching for. It was a beautiful crystal, glowing with an otherworldly light. They approached it cautiously, knowing that it was likely booby-trapped. But as they got closer, they heard a loud rumbling noise. Suddenly, the walls started to shake, and the floor began to crack beneath their feet. The group knew they had to act fast if they wanted to get out of there alive. They worked together to carefully extract the artifact from its pedestal, and as they did, the shaking stopped. They had succeeded in their mission, but they knew that the journey ahead would not be any easier. With the artifact in their possession, they made their way back up to the surface, knowing that they would have to face even more challenges on their journey. But they were determined to see it through to the end, no matter what lay ahead. Chapter 17. Title: The Dungeon of Elements. The group had been walking for hours through the dense forest, following the directions given to them by the mysterious voice. As they approached the entrance to the dungeon, they could feel the weight of the air around them change, becoming thick and heavy with magic. The dungeon was made of ancient stone, covered in moss and vines, with a large set of wooden doors blocking their path. The group gathered around the entrance, preparing themselves for what lay ahead. Rob stepped forward and examined the doors, looking for a way to open them. As he did, a loud rumbling noise echoed through the air, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Suddenly, the doors burst open, revealing a dark, ominous path leading down into the depths of the dungeon. The group exchanged a glance, knowing that there was no turning back now. They stepped forward, their weapons drawn and their hearts pounding in their chests. As they descended deeper into the dungeon, the air grew colder and the darkness grew thicker. They could hear the sounds of creatures moving around them, and they knew that they were not alone. They came across traps and puzzles that required them to use their skills and knowledge to solve. They had to jump over spikes, dodge fireballs, and use their knowledge of ancient languages to decipher inscriptions on walls. Finally, they reached a large room, and in the center of it, they saw the artifact they had been sent to retrieve. The artifact was a small, intricate orb, pulsating with a soft blue light. The group approached it cautiously, knowing that they had to be careful not to set off any more traps. They reached out to grab it, but suddenly, the room began to shake. The group looked around, trying to figure out what was happening, when suddenly, they saw a massive dragon appear before them. Its scales gleamed in the soft light, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly power. The dragon let out a deafening roar and charged towards the group, its jaws gaping open. The group scattered, dodging its attacks and trying to find a way to defeat it. Erebus stepped forward, his staff glowing with a bright light. He called upon the power of the elements and unleashed a blast of fire towards the dragon. The dragon roared in pain, and its scales began to smoke. The group took this as their chance and attacked the dragon together, their weapons hitting its weak points. With one final blow, the dragon let out a final roar and fell to the ground, defeated. The group let out a sigh of relief, knowing that their mission was complete. They retrieved the artifact and made their way out of the dungeon, feeling a newfound sense of strength and accomplishment. Chapter 18, The Battle for the Artifact. The group, consisting of Rob, Valley Man Beans, Erebus, Longo_Man, Gaming Ramon, Gank, Happier, CC Defender, WTF27PL, Charlie Emily, Sakurin, and Funny Jamie, had finally reached the entrance of the dungeon. The air was thick with tension as they prepared to face whatever dangers lay ahead. As they descended into the depths of the dungeon, the group encountered various traps and obstacles. Erebus used his knowledge of ancient artifacts to decipher the runes etched into the walls, while Defender's expertise in explosives proved invaluable in disarming any traps they encountered. After several hours of navigating through the twisting passages, they finally reached the room where the artifact was said to be located. But they were not alone. A group of rival adventurers, led by a fierce warrior named Crag, were already there, waiting for them. Crag had long coveted the artifact for himself, and he would stop at nothing to claim it. The two groups faced off, and a fierce battle ensued. Rob, Valley Man Beans, and Gaming Ramon charged forward, their swords clashing with Crag's group. Erebus and Longo_Man provided support from the back with their bows, taking out any enemies from a distance. Happier and CC Defender worked together to create a makeshift barricade, providing cover for the rest of the group. WTF27PL, Charlie Emily, Sakurin, and Funny Jamie were the group's healers, using their magic to mend any wounds and keep their allies in the fight. Their spells kept the group going, even as the battle raged on. The battle was long and grueling, but the group refused to back down. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Crag's group began to falter. With one final push, the group managed to defeat them. With the enemy defeated, the group made their way to the center of the room, where the artifact was housed. It was a beautiful gemstone, pulsing with an inner light. As they approached it, they could feel its power coursing through their bodies. But they knew they couldn't stay for long. The dungeon was unstable, and they needed to get out before it collapsed. With the artifact in their possession, they made their way back to the surface. As they emerged from the dungeon, they could see the sun beginning to rise in the distance. They had been fighting all night, but they had emerged victorious. The artifact would prove to be a valuable asset in their journey, and they knew they were one step closer to their ultimate goal. Exhausted but triumphant, the group set out once again, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 19. As the group continued their journey through the forest, they stumbled upon an old map tucked away in a chest in a long-abandoned cabin. The map appeared to be a treasure map, and it led to an island that was rumored to be filled with riches beyond imagination. Excited by the prospect of treasure, the group decided to set sail for the island. They spent several days gathering supplies and preparing their boat, and then they set off across the sea. As they sailed, the group encountered rough waters and fierce storms. They battled against the elements, determined to reach their destination. Finally, after days at sea, they caught sight of the island on the horizon. As they approached the shore, they saw that the island was lush and green, with towering mountains and thick forests. They anchored their boat in a sheltered cove, and they set off to explore the island. The group trekked through the dense forest, hacking their way through vines and underbrush. They encountered all sorts of strange creatures along the way, from massive snakes to colorful birds with wingspans as wide as they were tall. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew thin and the ground grew treacherous. They had to navigate steep cliffs and narrow ledges, and they had to be careful not to fall to their deaths. Finally, after days of arduous travel, the group came to a massive cave. The entrance was guarded by a fierce dragon, but the group had faced down dangerous creatures before. They drew their weapons and charged into the cave. As they fought their way through the dragon's lair, they discovered the true treasure of the island, a massive hoard of gold and precious gems. The group gathered as much treasure as they could carry and then made their way back to their boat. As they sailed away from the island, their pockets filled with gold and their hearts filled with adventure, the group knew that they had truly become legends. Chapter 20. Title: A Bittersweet Farewell. As the group approached the portal that would take them back home, they couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. They had been through so much together, fought against incredible odds, and formed a bond that would last a lifetime. But now it was time to say goodbye and return to their own worlds. Rob, the main character, was the first to step towards the portal. He turned around and looked at his companions one last time. Valley Man Beans, Erebus, Longo_Man, Gaming Ramon, Gank, Happier and CC Defender, WTF27PL, Charlie Emily, Sakuran, and Funny Jamie, all stood there, looking back at him with a mix of emotions. "It's been an honor fighting by your side," Rob said, his voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have asked for better companions." The group remained silent, but their expressions conveyed their gratitude and affection for Rob. Each one of them had a unique experience and journey, but they all shared the same bond of friendship and trust. Valley Man Bean stepped forward and gave Rob a tight hug. "You have been an incredible leader, Rob. I'll never forget the adventures we had together." Erebus nodded in agreement. "We may come from different worlds, but we have become a family here." Gaming Ramon smiled. "I'm going to miss you all so much. Thank you for the memories." As they each said their goodbyes, Rob felt a lump forming in his throat. He had never imagined that he would form such strong bonds with people from different worlds, but here they were, saying goodbye to each other as if they had been friends for years. After a few minutes, Rob took a deep breath and stepped towards the portal. He looked back one last time and saw his companions waving at him with tears in their eyes. He knew that this wasn't the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. As he stepped through the portal, Rob felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. He closed his eyes and let the feeling wash over him. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in the middle of a busy street. He looked around and saw that he was back in his own world. He smiled as he realized that he had completed his mission and returned home safely. But at the same time, he couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. He had left behind his companions and the world that had become his second home. Rob took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. He knew that no matter where he went or what he did, he would never forget the incredible adventure that he had with his companions. As he walked away, he felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. He had accomplished what he had set out to do, and he had made lifelong friends in the process. He knew that this was just the beginning of his journey, and he couldn't wait to see where life would take him next. To be continued.